The first day of the weekend activities was devoted to the modified stock event and found a host of the country's leading dirt track jockeys tuned up for the event. Buddy Sagar in car number 101 was second in the preceding week's grueling time trials.
Do you remember that time NASCAR raced on multiple surfaces at the same time? Probably not, as the last time that happened was in 1958. The Daytona Beach and Road Course was made up of sand and asphalt on opposite sides of each other on the circuit located in Daytona Beach, presenting a unique challenge to competitors that we have yet to see in modern-day NASCAR. Opened in 1902, the Daytona Beach Circuit combined a paved highway known as A1A and as well the beach surface on the opposite side, which created a large oval style track, which is commonly seen today, of course, in now current day NASCAR, but it held a lap length of just over 3 miles. The track was actually lengthened to over 4 miles after several decades into the 1940s. Many races were held at the venue between the opening of the circuit and the official formation of NASCAR in 1948, but it wasn't until 1949 when NASCAR Cup Series, or as known at the time, the NASCAR Strictly Stock Series, would make its first trip for a championship race at the venue. In its first race, a field of 28 cars competed, where season champion from 1949 Red Byron would actually pick up the victory. The race only saw one single lead change after Gilbert Sosby actually led 34 of the 40 laps in this race, just to be overtaken by Byron after a mistake, and that would allow Byron to lead the final 6 laps on his way to his first win at the circuit in the NASCAR Cup Series in his Oldsmobile. Now, Byron had won previous races at the Daytona Beach Circuit, just of course not under the NASCAR formation. After the success, NASCAR would actually move this race to February the following year for 1950, which of course is a tradition that we see in Daytona with the Daytona 500 to this current day as it opens up the season with the 500. After Byron picked up the win in 1949, he appeared to be set to win the following year, actually in 1950, until he had gear issues which forced him into the pits on the 25th lap, which handed the lead and the win as well to Harold Kite. Byron actually still managed to recover to a second place result, even facing those issues. Marshall Teague won the following year in the fabulous Hudson Hornet, which is such an iconic, car within the sport of NASCAR that we all really know from the Cars movie, of course, which would also be Teague's first career win in the Top Series in NASCAR. And after that, Teague actually backed up his 1951 win with another win at the track in 1952, where the race was actually shortened by 2 laps because of an incoming tide onto the beach. I guess the downsides maybe of racing on the beach, I guess. As you could imagine, speaking upon issues of racing on the beach, this was an issue that the cars had faced with this circuit, of course, now with the combination of going off of sand onto the opposite side parallel to it with the pavement. But the sand would often cause issues with the cars that actually had a history of messing specifically with engines and brakes as well. There was electrical issues that the cars would face. The ocean mist actually forced cars often to use a windshield wiper, so obviously they could see where they're going when they would get back on to the parallel highway road, going back down what we would call the front straightaway. Now just imagine current day NASCAR with how technologically advanced, of course, the cars are and how low they sit to the ground now compared to what it was in the very late 40s going into the 50s of this race. Would the cars be able to actually handle racing on the sand? That would be a really unique thing to see play out. And on top of issues that we would see the sand play with cars, there was also some wild moments you could imagine using multiple surfaces, but mainly it all kind of took place in the sand. Cars often slid off into the surf. Junior Johnson, known for having a wild flip on the beach, as well as multi-car incidents would strike quite often in the corners that would send cars tumbling. And of course, you can imagine with all the sand kicking up, the visibility absolutely atrocious for other drivers piling in there, just leading to some moments of all-out chaos. we advance now into the year 1953. The event is continuing to bring in crowds as NASCAR is continuing to build its brand in its early days, of course, of the sport's development. Pole winner Bob Pronger actually crashed his car in the very first turn of the race after he made a bet with second place starter Fonty Flock on which two of those guys would lead the first laps. As you can imagine, Pronger did not win the bet. However, Flock, he never even won the race either. He actually ran out of fuel on the very last lap while taking the white flag, and he would sacrifice the victory to Bill Blair. This race really showed the excitements of NASCAR that hypes fans to, this day, from chaos racing up front for the lead to the nail-biting fuel mileage endings that we often see a few times every season. At this point, running the race at this venue was becoming a complicated situation for NASCAR. Obviously, as you can imagine, to keep in mind, they're racing on a public highway as well as right on a beachfront, and this would obviously create issues because of the continuous and rapid urban growth in the Daytona Beach area. The beachfront was littered with hotels. The race was bringing in large crowds, and this is obviously when Bill France Sr. Has to come up with something, and this is when he made the push to come up with a plan to resolve this, and that plan would lead to what we know now as Daytona International Speedway, home, of course, of the Daytona 500. The new venue would eventually begin building in 1957 and held its first actual Daytona 500 in 1959, which of course we now know is just the biggest event and the same race that opens up the points-paying season every year. So between that plan of Daytona International Speedway being developed from 1953 to its building beginning in 1957, it was complicated, but NASCAR still did continue to host these beach course races from still 1954 through to the final points paying event in 1958. So we fast forward to a year later following 1953, now 1954, Tim Flock would win the Cup Series event only to be disqualified, which actually would give the win to such an iconic name in the NASCAR world of Lee Petty. And then the following year, we actually saw another situation of the original winner being disqualified, and this time it was Fireball Roberts, and guess who would win the race? It was the driver that got disqualified from the win a year before. Tim Flock would earn the victory. Flock would then go back to back with another win at the course in 1956. The following year, Cotton Owens in 1957 would actually pick up the victory after a back-and-forth duel with Paul Goldsmith. This race actually saw the first ever Cup Series race with an average speed of over 100 miles per hour. Of course, something that is much of a normalcy these days, but was a big moment back in these times. So we arrive in 1958, the final year of a points-paying Cup race at the Daytona Beach Course, where Paul Goldsmith won from pole position, but that didn't mean that it was over for the beach course quite yet. The course would be continued to be used through to 1961 in what we now know as, the Clash, the Budweiser duels, the Sprint Unlimited, basically through Daytona Speed Weeks. However, the track actually did not use the original public highway road in those years for the Speed Weeks like we originally saw. The early successes of this beach course, is what allowed NASCAR to have the potential to build that 2.5 mile oval nearby and create one of the biggest motorsport races on earth with that Daytona 500. Just imagine if these early events failed, where would NASCAR be, if these events were not successful and we never were actually able to see the Daytona 500 because of that? Let me know what you think NASCAR would look like down in the comments. It's now been several decades since we have seen the beach course and a NASCAR Cup Series race on a multi-surface type event, from pavement to sand to anything, of course. Now, we have seen NASCAR continue to experiment with ideas in recent years and take risks with the calendar, from racing inside the LA Coliseum the last few years for the Clash, and as well now the streets of Chicago and the dirt of Bristol, although no longer on the calendar for this 2020 2024 season. However, with all these, creative ideas that NASCAR has come up with, we have not seen a return of a multi-surface track. Although, an unrealistic idea, let's be honest here, you can't help but wonder what current day NASCAR would look like on the Daytona Beach circuit. Cup drivers having to adapt to the sand and pavement all in one, the engineers, of course, and crew chiefs trying to set up a car that can withstand, both of those conditions, as the teams as well have to use their creative visions to maximize a car's reliability while dealing with the challenges of specifically the sand. Back in the day, of course, reliability not great overall with cars, and it was very common for the large majority of the field to retire out of this race because of not only reliability not being great with the old cars, but the sand playing havoc as well with the cars, electrical system, engines, brakes, etc. In the end, over 60 years since the last running of this race, but it still holds its important puzzle piece that built the success of the sport in the Daytona area, allowing it to expand further and further across the United States in the coming decades to follow. This was a new experience for me to try a video like this, as I'm really trying to dive deep into creating a greater understanding for myself and my viewers as well, and appreciation of the history of the sport and how we have got here. And I hope you guys enjoyed this style of video, as I'm hoping it's something that you guys enjoy and we can all kind of learn about the sport together going into the future. And I really wanted to start, with a track that, in my opinion, is very unrecognized but holds a big puzzle piece into the early successes of NASCAR, allowing it to build into what it has become to this day. That was me giving you guys the rundown on the history of the Daytona Beach Course, the first and, well, what looks to be last multi-surface event that we will see, at least for some time to come. But that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.